So from our side, it's not showing, but I can see it on the events page.
It isn't working on ours either. It's just the countdown's finished, but it says it hasn't started.
Okay. Then I am going to stop the live stream and I'm going to share straight directly to our lab on Facebook page. And apologies for this. We will still finish before time.
Webinar without a technical glitch here and there.
Yeah, I'm very sorry.
I think next time we should all just get together in person and do this.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our very first Facebook Live lunchtime chat. My name is Tyla Dallas. I'm the Marketing and Legal Officer for the Cape South African Jewish Board of Deputies, and I am its Election Operations Officer this year to help facilitate a free and fair election of board representatives. We have an exciting panel lined up for you today. I welcome Darren Bloch, CEO of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, Amanda Bowman, Vice President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, and our very own Executive Director, Daniel Bloch. Thank you all for making the time to be here today, especially given the time difference. We are going to chat today about communal democracy and the importance of making your voice heard in communal organizations. As you all know, we are currently running an election process and calling for nominations of Jewish community members in the Western Cape to stand for these elections. Darren, I'm going to start with you. Why do you feel it is important for community members to be heard and represented around the board table?
Well, thanks very much. And hello from Sydney, everybody. Look, I'm just very fortunate that you've invited me to join this conversation because it's one of the most important things that I think we can express to our community about getting involved. All of the things that make up our community, all of the things that provide us with a foundation and a platform to be able to interact with society, they all come from the Board of Deputies. Board of Deputies is about advocacy, but it's also about leadership. And you can have a great opportunity of getting involved and shaping the outcomes of your community, but also your family and your friends, your schools, everything else that is part of a life. So from my perspective, it's one of the most important things that you can do because it can shape your society in which you live and operate. You can enhance your life and the well-being of your family and your friends. But at the same time, you can also give back to a community that's given so much to all of us. So not only is it rewarding, not only is it fulfilling, but allows for you to shape the future of society and to create essentially a better society and a better community for future generations. Now, over the course of this particular webinar, I'm sure we'll unpack a few of those things, Tyler, but I couldn't encourage more for people to get involved and to complement the work of the professional staff. Both lay and professionals working together in order to be able to provide, all of those things that the community needs, but also to work together in order to provide some of those enhancements is a very rewarding experience. And here in New South Wales and obviously across the world, we've tackled COVID, and we've done that through the Board of Deputies in terms of vaccinations and being able to provide and get the services and the support from government that you need. You can only do that through the board. We had floods and we have had fires and all of those things, and we've been able to shape and get support to those people by also giving back to the broader community. And when a war broke out in Europe, we banded together and made sure that we provided all the support that we needed internationally. So, it's always about thinking local, acting global, and making sure that you're part of where we're going as a society, and more broadly, where we're going as the Jewish diaspora more globally.
Thank you, Darren. Yeah, and I think that we do represent a very different position, and that we do have lay leadership as well as professional staff. So you're having to keep the finger on the pulse, but you're still having your core activities handled by your professionals. Amanda, this is now for you. How do you engage your community? So what platforms are available to them to be heard?
So at the Board of Deputies, we have 8 meetings each year where all our deputies, all our representatives come together. Over the last 2 years, we've obviously shifted those meetings from in-person to virtual, so using an online platform. And we've now moved to a hybrid platform so that people can either come in person if they want to, or virtually if they prefer to engage remotely. So 8 times a year, we bring everyone together. Once a year, or at least once a year, we do that meeting in what we call a regional community, so a community outside of London, to make sure that we as a Jewish community are connected, not just in London and the Southeast, where something like 80% of the Jewish community resides, but around the country. More than that, though, those meetings allow deputies to hold the president and the other trustees, honorary officers, vice presidents, and the treasurer to account. But beyond that, we have meetings of what we call our divisions. So our committees, communities and education, international and defense and interfaith, and finance and organization committees. And they meet in parallel to those board meetings, but in my case, my defense and interfaith divisions meet monthly. And we then have a huge range of working groups that our deputies are involved with on issues from interfaith and social justice and Holocaust education and higher education and campus affairs. We have open anti-Semitism meetings, so that whatever the issue is that our deputies are interested in, there's something that they can plug into and get involved. It's so important that they both get involved, but also for both, I think what's different in, I would imagine in your organizations as much as ours, is that because we are directly elected, I was directly elected by my peers, other deputies. So first of all, by my community, my synagogue, and then by my deputies. So my mandate is representative both of the community as a whole in the UK, but also of our deputies. And how can I do that unless there's a way for deputies to be involved on a regular basis on the issues they care about? Because otherwise, why should government listen to the Board of Deputies if we're not hearing directly from the deputies themselves?
Yeah, I agree completely. Thank you, Amanda. So I'm sure that much like with our own community and around our own board table, you find that in your own communities, there's diverse opinions on a number of social issues. Sometimes it seems impossible to reconcile these views when formulating strategies or responses. So my question for you, Daniel, is what values underpin board decisions?
Thanks so much, Tyla, and just thank you again to Darren and Amanda for joining us as well. It's always great to get an international perspective on things. I think the values, we talk about integrity, we talk about accountability, we talk about inclusivity. But one value I was thinking about that is probably missing is passion. We all have a passion. We're Jewish, we have a passion to work and serve in our community. And I think anybody that's looking to get more involved in any communal organization needs to have passion and drive for the community, but then also be open-minded. Our communities are very diverse, especially in Cape Town, in the Western Cape. So to be more inclusive of people's different beliefs, genders, etc., and then take accountability. This is the community we live in, and we want to create the best possible future we can for our families, for our children, and that's why we need to, as we say in our election campaign, get involved. Votes do matter, and we need to all step up and take the bull by the horns. Don't wait for someone else to create or make your future. Be more proactive. So I would say, Tyler, that you really do need to be passionate and portray some of those values I've just mentioned.
Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. So for those who are wondering where we might be going with these questions, in my mind, Darren, you did touch on it. Communal democracy is the engagement of the community with its institutions. So they are heard on social issues facing the community. They can guide the values, responses, and strategies the institution develops. And with that, as Darren did say, you tend to guide the direction of the community as a whole. So without an active vocal community, our boards are unable to represent you effectively. So for our viewers, if you have any questions for our panelists, please pop them into the comment section of the video. Amanda, I'm going to go back to you. So I note the British board has over 300 deputies directly elected by synagogues and communal organizations. This ranges from youth movements to social welfare charities and regional councils, as you mentioned. You also have a number of under 35 observers to ensure that a new generation of community-minded activists can contribute to your work. So in most organizations, Darren, I'm sure you also find it in your side, there's this talk of a missing middle that should be bridging the generational divide, but are currently untapped. So I'm curious from each of our organizations, what best practice has been to engage this group? Darren, I don't know if we should start with you.
Sure. I think it's fair to say that communal participation and engagement really is a constant challenge. And this missing middle that you talk about, it is a challenge, but it's a vital thing that we need to address. And I think it seems obvious, but we talk about it quite a bit. But before I get to that, this is not unique to the Jewish community. It's not unique to a geographical area. This missing middle is something that happens in a number of community organizations, and the disconnect from community more generally. And I think we need to also start, with a sense of realism that this is a challenge that is beyond us. But it doesn't mean that there aren't a number of things that we can do in order to address it. But if I go and have a look at other community organizations, whether Rotary or Lions, they're facing same kind of challenges. So again, we look at, okay, if that is the situation that we're dealing with, we've got an ever-growing digital environment, and we need to look at how do we dedicate resources into social media and engaging with people on a level that they feel comfortable with, but also that is sustainable. So how do we engage with people? How do we get them to be involved and understand the benefits, not only to the community and the organization, but to themselves, because there are substantial benefits to people who are involved and to their families. We've just kind of touched on that. But it's providing content and offering a whole range of different opportunities for people across all different ages, right? At different times of the day when it's convenient to their schedules. Because, what we're finding, of course, is that people have obviously got very busy lives, and they're dedicated and focused on the things that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And so we need to be able to offer and make it really clear to everybody, although all of those ages, across the entire day, across the entire week, that you do as much as you can when you can do it. And I think that's really important. We've touched on previously, there's a whole range of different ways to interact. And the level of interest and also the topics of interest, but we need to be able to make that clear. If there's something that you're passionate about it will be harnessed and it will be utilized. And we need to explain that, but then also translate that into the outcome that they can be a part of. So for us, we've put in resources having a dedicated digital manager to oversee those channels. And we're also looking at how we can engage with younger members of the community via those social channels and providing content that's relevant to them. And since we've done that, we certainly have seen a very positive engagement across a number of initiatives. We saw that at our Yom HaShoah commemoration. We had more than 2,000 people tune into that. I think it's our highest sort of ever in terms of all of those platforms. And that's because we gave an opportunity for people to either come in person on the night to stream it or to do it sort of on a delayed stream. Again, flexible options, making sure that it's relevant to those audiences and those people. And if we do that, and if we constantly look at how we can provide content that's relevant, that's flexible, but also translates the input and the time and the effort that they make into the benefit, the global benefit, the local benefit, and the individual benefit. That is the way that we will make sure that we find those missing middle, and not only get them for a sugar hit, but for it to be a mutually beneficial relationship that is enduring.
I'm on mute. Thanks, Darren. And then Amanda, just going back to you, can you maybe touch on a bit more about your under 35 observers and how they interact with your board, in what way?
Sure. So the under 35 observer scheme was established for exactly the reasons that we've already heard. So, it's absolutely clear that missing middle is a missing middle in many, many organizations. And we need to understand the best way to engage people and the issues that they're most interested in. So we offered all our members the opportunity to bring in an under 35 observer at no cost. So every representative that is part of the Board of Deputies comes with a representation fee. So we offer them an additional person to come onto the board under 35 at no fee. They can get involved in absolutely everything. They just can't vote. So that's the only difference. But for me, there's far more. And as we've just heard, there are lots of different ways of engaging young people. We work closely with the World Jewish Congress and some of their Jewish diplomatic corps who have become deputies as a result of being involved with World Jewish Relief, representing their communities on the board. We have a under 35 forum that goes beyond our observers. So every 2 years, we're looking at bringing together a specific under 35 forum. We have a young professionals network that also reaches out into the community to engage. And our biggest feeder of those under 35s, I say feeder, but where we're getting those people from are from people that have been involved with the Jewish youth movements and with the Union of Jewish Students. So we know that young Jews are often very active on campus and get involved with the Union of Jewish Students. They have, for us, the Union of Jewish Students have the biggest group of deputies on board. They can have up to 12 deputies represented. But when they stop being students, they often stop being involved with the board and they go out, they become that missing middle. And so we encourage them to come back as under 35 observers, and that's been quite successful.
Sounds great, Amanda. Daniel, I'm going to ask the same question of you in terms of what activities the board does to engage this missing middle, but also pulling out a question we've gotten on Facebook in terms of what the Cape Town board is doing to ensure succession or leadership for the future.
Thanks, Tyla. So some great points that both Darren and Amanda have alluded to. From our perspective, it's all about marketing our Judaism. We are constantly informing the community and working with our affiliates. We have about 67 affiliates, about 90 Jewish organizations in the Western Cape. And we work with the likes of our South African Union of Jewish Students, our youth movements, our young adult movements like Moshe House, to try and connect with the younger age groups. And in some cases, Amanda, you correctly said, where do they go to when they stop studying? They simply disappear. And that's why it's important for us to be connecting right from the school levels, telling the youth about the community, who the Board of Deputies are, the opportunities within our own community and the various organizations. They may not leave matric or grade 12 right now and go, hang on, I want to join the board or I want to join an organization, but we will have planted the seed. And I think that is extremely important, to plant the seed. We're finding that the youth are far more in touch with society. They have a lot more burning questions. I know in my day, when I was in grade 12, I wasn't thinking about gender-based violence and issues around climate change. I was thinking on a lot more party elements, but the youth of today are thinking about those ideas and they want to engage in the discussion. So we're trying as the board to facilitate these discussions, to work with our partners in the community at different levels to reach that missing middle, and not just within the Jewish community, so to speak, those Jewish youth that are at the Jewish day schools or members of the shuls, but also those families that are sort of unaffiliated, if you want to ask. They're not necessarily going to a Jewish school. They're not part of a shul membership, but they still want some sort of connection. And I know, Darren, you mentioned you did a Yom Ha'atzmaut, I think a digital session. We did, the South African Zionist Federation hosted Yom Ha'atzmaut live in person this year. We also had just over 2,000 people. People just came out to be connected. And I think as part of what the board does, we want to keep that connection going and try our very best. And that's why we need the community's involvement. We don't necessarily have all the answers to all the burning questions, but there are a lot of smart people out there, a lot of really incredible organizations that are doing their utmost to keep our community connected. So I think it's going to be an ongoing project to connect with this missing middle. It's not something that's going to be rectified in the next 6 months. So we just have to keep working at it.
Can I just add there that approachability and respect as well of new ideas and of issues that may not be, front of mind for us, but making sure that people feel that we're approachable, that B, they feel like they're going to get respect and be listened to and heard. And it may not necessarily be, the top 5, but maybe it's a future issue. Maybe, we can work with them in getting to understand it and finding out why it's important. And I also think in a roundabout way, sometimes people also want to make their own mistakes, but making sure that they're mitigated to the extent that we learn from it. And that's, again, it comes down to just having a two-way street where there's mutual respect, so that people can talk about the things that matter to them, because they might not necessarily feel comfortable to talk about them because they might not necessarily align with the printed platform. And that's okay. And I think it's okay for us to say, that's fine. But you can also have an opportunity by getting involved to shape what that platform might look like in the future. But involvement starts today. And this is what we're focusing on today. But you can certainly be part of the future. And I think that conversation, again, talks to both the respect and approachability elements.
I agree with that, Darren. And I think it's true. You want to harness the experience of your communal members who have different experiences, and then use that to innovate your policy, innovate your strategies to make sure you're constantly speaking to your broader community. In South Africa, we have quite a diverse community, just looking at in terms of how they identify with their Jewish religion, from Orthodox, progressive, traditional, secular, mixed. I'm quite curious for you, Darren and Amanda, what your respective communities look like and how you combine that dividing custom with general consensus when responding to issues. So as you say, Darren, looking at different experience, obviously focusing on respect, but then how that actually becomes an outcome, a tangible outcome for your board.
I might let Amanda go first on this one.
Okay. So, we currently have 311 deputies and observers. About 25% of them are under 35. So that's pretty good, I would say. About a third, just under a third are women. That ain't so good. It's, we women have opinions. We're fierce. We, in the world, we represent more than half of the global population. And so why aren't we able to get more women to become deputies? That's a real issue for us. In terms of the denominations, we have 18 organizations from the liberal community, 5 from Masorti, 27 Reform. The Sephardi and Portuguese have 5 representations, 5 representatives. The United Synagogue is our biggest group with 45. And then the strictly Orthodox with the Federation are 7 and 40 independent synagogues, and then around 40 organizations, communal organizations as well. So that's pretty diverse. I think that, often the difficulty of combining custom with consensus and really trying to be representative, the challenge for us as honorary officers is that there's a danger that we go to the lowest common denominator, and the lowest common denominator does not help any of us, really. It doesn't change policy, it doesn't really speak to anybody, and so sometimes we just have to do our very best. We listen hard, and Darren, you've already made the point that it doesn't matter whether your views are right out there or whether they're right in the mainstream. I think it's really important that we get to listen to everybody and take a view both from within our deputy base, but also with other organisations that maybe aren't represented on the board. We do that often through the development of what we call our Jewish manifesto, and we do that at local level and then at national level. And that becomes our main instrument to build consensus and develop our policy. But obviously things come up between the time of developing of those instruments. And so Israel is always something which is going to divide and bring the community together at the same time. So I think it was 2 years ago now, we did have a debate on the floor of the board around the two-state solution to reconfirm that that was the policy of the board. It was done with a good amount of preparation and due respect for everybody's opinion. And it allowed us to be able to say absolutely firmly that the Board of Deputies supports a two-state solution, however challenging that is for one or other across the community or whatever's happening in the world at any one time. That's we know that we have our community behind us on that.
Thanks, Amanda. Daniel, anything to add?
I'll let Darren have a say. He was about to say something, so I'll go after Darren.
Sure. Well, I think making sure that there's broader representation is important. I mean, we've obviously got a very diverse community here, whether it's progressive or orthodox, for people who are disconnected, but, still identify, obviously, people who come forward when they need something and, retreat back when they don't. And that's again, this is the nature of a diverse and broad community. I mean, from for our office bearers, we have a vice president and we have a secretary, honorary secretary that are female. And of course, we're doing everything that we can to encourage more female participation. I mean, it's critically important. But not just female participation, it's participation, again, from a broad range of age groups, a broad range of those different people who interact with the community and society in a number of different ways, having gender diversity and making sure that we are as broadly representative as what we are in society. I think that's really important because, to Amanda's point, when we go to anybody and say, we represent the Jewish community, we truly want to represent the Jewish community, not only in name and not only because of its status, but because we truly have representation across the deputies, associates. I mean, we have associates, deputies, office bearers. We want all of that to be representative. And so we have a system, of course, where we've got organizations and we have, directly elected. And so at this particular latest election, we have 45 directly elected constituent deputies. We have 69, directly elected deputies, and we've got 69 constituent deputies. Now, 2 years ago, there was more interest in becoming directly elected. And so these things are in swings and roundabouts. But, what does it indicate? It indicates that, levels of interest, involvement change. And we need to try and provide as much stability as possible so that the strength, the service, everything that we need to produce, that we smooth that out. And we smooth that out in conjunction, in connection with what is going on more broadly with the constituency. So, I can't say enough that we want to encourage, obviously, more people to get involved, but at the same time, whilst more people get involved, to ensure that we've got diversity and equality across all of those various streams, because you can have more associates, but then you still don't get that extended to deputies and all the office bearers and so on. So making sure that is consistent all the way through is extremely important.
Thanks, Darren. Daniel, I'm coming back to you.
Okay. Thanks, Tyler. So we have about 18 members on our council, our Cape Council. 8 are female, 10 are male. So we have quite a good split. We also have a good mixture of orthodox, progressive, for example, youth and experience make up the council. And what we're doing now with the elections is we are encouraging more diverse people to get involved. As Darren, you've said, thinking has changed, the community is changing. We need people with different ideas, fresh ideas to come on to see how do we innovate, how do we grow our community. If I look at the affiliate organizations that make up our community, we have a lot of the major organizations have female leaders. The head of the Zionist Federation, you look at the head of the Union of Jewish Women, obviously, you would think that in today's day and age, you can't take that for granted. And then you have a number of other organizations, the head of the progressive community, for example. So it's important to keep the continuity and the flow of leadership moving. But at the same time, it's important for members of the community to step up. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is to try and find those people that are committed, that do want to get more involved. And I think one of the challenges is actually a lack of understanding. People, I've spoken to a few friends recently, and I talk about the board of deputies, and they say, oh, it must be so time consuming for members of your lay leaders. And I said, well, it's one meeting every 3 weeks, for example. Not that things can't be discussed in between, but the time, how valuable is your time when you are trying to work for your community, when you're trying to make things better for those around you? I don't think you can put a number to, or a value to that kind of time. So I think it is very important. I think Cape Town, we have a fantastically exciting, diverse community. We have a lot of input from a number of different sectors. And I think that's a way of keeping this particular community growing and healthy.
Thank you, Daniel. So am I correct in saying that the New South Wales board and British board, much like our Cape board, represent its community's civil and political rights by engaging with civil society and government to foster relationships and then build mutual understanding? So education is quite a key component of the boards, is that correct? So one core mandate for our board is promoting religious freedom and confronting anti-Semitism. Now, although we have comparably low rates of anti-Semitism in this country, we still find this manifest in schools and other academic institutions, in corporates and in the media. I note the amazing step taken by the Victorian government to combat anti-Semitism, banning the display of the Nazi swastika. Darren, can you speak to what traction this has given your own board in getting similar legislation passed, and then the anti-Semitism rates you've been experiencing?
Yeah, absolutely. So that particular ban, that's something that has been driven in New South Wales as well. It's gone through a parliamentary hearing. I've given evidence of that. We've got draft legislation, and we also have a commitment from our Attorney General for that to be introduced this month. So that commitment has now been filtered to Queensland, Tasmania, and you start to see the drift that the country is looking like having state-based legislation sort of across the board. I think that that's really where it's going. But it's not necessarily the speed in which we get legislation, whether it's Nazi symbols or anything else. It's really the quality of it. And it's making sure that A, it's enforceable, but B, there's education associated with it, but it's effective, right? We all want effective legislation. And so that's why a lot of work has been put in on this particular legislation, because we've seen a rise in right-wing extremism. We certainly have seen that. There was a documentary on one of our streaming services, outlining that. And, I have to say that, the government in New South Wales has taken, impressive action. We just had actually an announcement on Friday for a record package, both funding as well as a religious affairs council to be set up with representation on it, to have direct input and voice into government about anything that is essentially important. Whether it's safety and security, which is, I guess, the first order of business for the council, but this is safety and security not only for the Jewish community, but for broader society. I mean, what's good for the Jewish community is obviously good for New South Wales and the state, and vice versa. You know, all of the faiths and all of the various groups that we interact with, you know, they all say they want to be safe. I mean, there is some very, you know, solid ground here where we talk about safety and security, and it's much better for us to act as a collective. We get much better results. The outcomes are fantastic. And it's also not just about when we talk about anti-Semitism. Of course, anti-Semitism is something that we're absolutely focused on and we're lasered on. But at the same time, it's any form of racism. You know, the flavor of racism of the day, whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's you know, the belittlement of any particular individual from whatever their background is, and anti-Semitism is a flavor of racism. And what we are doing and what we've focused on is working as a collective. And this is where our interfaith comes in. What is the legislation? How is it good for a broader society? How is it good for all people of faith? But then at the same time, you know, how do we make sure that we're using that collective voice? And one of the most powerful things that we can do is that when anti-Semitism occurs, it's not the Jewish community that's saying that's wrong. It's the other communities that are saying it's wrong. Just as when something happens to another community, for the Jewish community to come out and say, this is not acceptable in this state, in this country. This is not what we believe is right. And I just want to touch on something with the Nazi symbols legislation, because it's something that we've told the story about locally in this country, but maybe not necessarily it's known globally. But one of the critical elements of the Nazi symbols legislation is that it is going to free a symbol, right? The swastika, which is a sacred symbol to the Hindus, which was essentially taken and used for evil purposes, and give it back, so that the Hindus can feel proud to put the swastika up. Because some of the things that I've seen is that they don't feel comfortable to display it, because they're worried that people will confuse that symbol with something else. And so, you know, we are part of that education. You know, we are part of making sure that whilst at the same time, we make sure that the Nazi symbols, right, aren't displayed, that the sacred swastika of another faith is freed. And I think there's nothing more powerful than that, because that is mutually beneficial. That is good for society. And so when we looked at how we would approach that legislation, certainly from New South Wales, and I know that that is now something that's been done more broadly in this country, it's how does this legislation make every community safer? How does it make every community freer? And now we're seeing, you know, some very, very good momentum. And let's not forget, and again, this comes back to involvement. Why is it so important? Nazi symbols aren't good for anybody. They're not good for anybody. Anybody who's using a Nazi symbol is bad news, no matter who you are. And I think this is also part of the very important message, again, to the broader society, is that whether it's the Jewish Board of Deputies, the Jewish community, whatever we're saying, we are actually looking out for everybody. And that's an extremely important component. So that legislation is now getting some good momentum. We are expecting it in New South Wales this month. We have a budget very shortly as well in this state, and $28 million was just announced for multicultural and investment by the New South Wales government and this Affairs Council. So you can see we're getting lots of traction. We're doing that as a collective, and it's good for everybody.
Darren, it sounds amazing. Amanda and Daniel, can you speak to the possibility of similar action being taken in your own countries and then your own rates of anti-Semitism? Daniel, let's start with you.
Okay, thanks, Tyla. So in our country, our constitution allows for freedom of speech and expression. So artifacts like the swastika bands, even books like Mein Kampf, it's not illegal to sell those. But what we do as the board is we engage with those particular online stores, those particular organizations that are selling it, and we educate them. And we've had some successes in the past, especially the last several months, where artifacts were donated to the Holocaust and Genocide Center. The owners weren't really aware of the impact or the offensive nature it may have on the Jewish community. And It's the reason why we also do a lot of work with our interfaith partners to bring schools to the Holocaust Center, for example, to educate them as to the impact and the wording. Words matter. We run a campaign of words matter. There's no place for hate. I think these are powerful statements to make when you're educating and speaking to the external communities. I think in terms of anti-Semitism, Tyla, you touched on it previously. Cape Town, fortunately, we have one of the lowest rates. But because of the work we do with government, the relationships we have with our external partners, it does mean that we're able to limit what is happening. Now, so that the community is aware, there are elements that take place, every couple of weeks or every couple of months. The Board of Deputies is aware of everything that takes place. But there's lots of quiet conversations that take place behind the scenes. You also don't want to feed the flames, so to speak, make a mountain out of a molehill and give something more exposure than what it actually deserves. Sometimes it's like on social media, on Facebook, if one person's liked something, why do you want to stoke the fires there? It will die out on its own. But we do a lot of work in combating anti-Semitism, and we do that through education. I think that is probably one of the key things that we can tell our community and anybody getting involved in communal organizations, is to forge those relationships with our non-Jewish external partners, our other interfaith religious organizations. And as Darren, you said correctly, there's nothing more powerful than when there's an act of anti-Semitism and it's condemned by our friends at Christian societies, Muslim societies, for example. To give you an idea of one element, we took a group of our ward councillors. So each area within the city of Cape Town has a city official which looks after, the general maintenance, security, safety, water affairs, etc. And we took about 40 of them on a tour of the South African Jewish Museum and the Holocaust and Genocide Center. And at the end of those tours, the faces, the expressions of, there was no idea of what the Holocaust actually meant. There was no idea of the Jewish contribution in the Western Cape. And so much so that one of our Muslim ward councillors posted that she felt the tour was exceptional. She was encouraging members of her own community and her suburb to go on this, to get an understanding that it's not just the Holocaust, it was other forms of discrimination, as we've mentioned now. The benefits to the external community on combating things like anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination can be extremely powerful and can have a lasting impact and effect on everybody that's living both inside our own community and outside. So I think that there's a lot of work we could do, and we could literally have probably a full day discussion on anti-Semitism and the work that each of our boards do. So I hope I've put that into a good perspective, Tyla.
Thanks, Daniel. Amanda, same question to you, and maybe touching on the defense division of the board specifically and your role there.
Sure. So anti-Semitism, racism and religious freedoms all feed into the work that I do on the Defence and Interfaith Division. I'm not going to talk about the things that Darren and Daniel have already covered, because we're doing very similar work in those areas. I think what I'm going to touch to, Tyla, is the point that you said about, what is the rate of anti-Semitism in the UK? And we're seeing more anti-Semitic incidents, or we have seen more anti-Semitic incidents over the last year than ever before. Much of it going on online, as something like 45% online, I think. So, we talk about online being the new front line on tackling anti-Semitism. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is around tackling that, working with the social media platforms and the big online sellers to work with them to make sure that their policies and practices are appropriate. Tough work that goes on and on and on. And every time we think we're moving forward, something new happens and we go 2 steps backwards. But it's really important work. We're blessed in the UK with a lot of organisations that are specialist on different areas of of this particular area of work. So we have the Community Security Trust, who are specifically funded and supported to support us both in terms of physical security and safety, but also in monitoring anti-Semitic incidents and And so we are really blessed to have such good resources. But I'm going to touch a little on the religious freedoms, because we do a lot of work unseen and certainly uncelebrated, I suspect, in the main, except by our community, around issues like Shahita and Brit Milah, where ultimately, particularly in small communities, if there's any challenge to those issues, it undermines the very basics of being Jewish. And so we've been working really hard with the small community in Northern Ireland, who since the UK left the European Union, we've had a real challenge of getting kosher food into Northern Ireland. If you can't get kosher food into your communities, then it's really hard for your communities to survive. And so when we're looking at religious freedoms, we're looking at that. There are 4 different bills going through government at the moment around animal safety and security, all of which potentially affect our ability to provide kosher meat to our community. And as we've been talking about, by coming together with other communities, in this case, by coming together with the Muslim community, we have a stronger voice. There are so many things that we have in terms of interfaith that bring us together, and equally things that we need to build education and understanding of, to understand the differences. And a lot of what we're doing is around helping to do that.
Tyla, if I can just go back to the religious freedom part, because I think Amanda touched on something very important. A lot of the work that the board does go unnoticed. And that's why I made the point of, we're always aware. And we're not about celebrating and putting up in lights and saying how amazing the board is for doing this. We're all serving in our positions, whether we're professional or lay, because we have a passion for our community and we want the very best for our families, for our children. But I think it is important to note, things like, for example, Yontavim exams. It's always been a major problem for us in South Africa. I know different countries have different timetables and are affected differently, but what we managed to do with Stellenbosch University towards the end of last year is we had issues of Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah exams. We sat down with the university, they explained why they did what they did last year, but they made a concerted effort and released a document in black and white on their website, which states that no exam will be set on the first 2 days of Pesach, 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and where possible, they'll try and avoid Shabbat. That religious document then extended into the other religious groups, Diwali, the Hindu festival, obviously Eid, various other religious holidays where students were affected. Now, I know a lot of people might say, well, what about Sukkot and Shavuot and everything else? But I think what's important to note is it's small steps. Things won't change all at one go, like Darren had mentioned earlier. And the fact is now that Jewish students studying anywhere in South Africa know that there's a university where they don't need to worry about, do they fly home for Pesach or do they need to write an exam? And I think that's a direct benefit to our community, and other communities see what the Jewish community is doing and they can see that contribution, and we're able to work a lot closer together. So I think that's something very important to note.
Thanks, Dan.
And one of just quickly an example, because I think it's a really good one, because it's not something that's always noticed, as that was just touched on. There are things that just facilitate Jewish life that happen in the background. But one of the things that was very obvious and very clear is during COVID, during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because of lockdowns, there wasn't going to be able to be an opportunity to hear the shofar. And this was something that is obviously of critical importance. So what did we do? We made sure that shofar blowing could take place. And we went through a process in order to get exemptions for it. And the reality is that Jewish people in Sydney and across New South Wales, because it wasn't just in Sydney, wouldn't have been able to hear the shofar for the high holy days last year if it weren't for the Jewish Board of Deputies. And then when we talk to religious freedom, we talk to the things about practicing, that's a really good example. Because if the Jewish Board of Deputies didn't do that, that wouldn't have happened. And there are lots of examples that we've just touched on between all of us, Daniel, Amanda, about some of the things that happen on a day-to-day basis. But this really highlights that without the board and without your involvement, those things just wouldn't happen. People would just have to make it work. And we know that that's just not how it works. So really important point.
Thanks, Darren. So I'm looking, we haven't got any more questions on Facebook, so I think we can start with closing. I just wanted to go through each of our panelists. Again, thank you for being here, but I know we have touched on it already, but just in one sentence, if each of you could just say what communal democracy means to you. So Amanda, let's start with you.
I think for me, and I think I talk from a really personal perspective, because I was on my synagogue board of council before I became a deputy. And I think what communal democracy means to me is that it's a real opportunity to have my voice as part of the voice of how Jews in Britain are perceived and how we can make change. And it's been a complete joy to be involved. Apart from, why does anyone volunteer to do anything? Well, firstly, because you're asked, and today we are asking you to put yourself forward. But you get more back than you put in. And for me, that's absolutely been the case. I've made some incredible relationships with people that I would never have met otherwise. And I've made, I believe, a huge difference to British Jewry. And so I'm only doing that as my one voice amongst 311. And it's a really important thing for me.
Thanks, Amanda. Daniel?
Thanks. I'm trying to think of how to sum it up in one sentence. That's quite tough. I hope Darren can do that. So yeah, communal democracy, I agree with what Amanda said. And up until 13 months ago, I've been in my role, and sorry, I'm going to use my powers as the host to get maybe 2 or 3 more sentences in. But 13 months ago, I wasn't part of the Board of Deputies. I started in May last year as Executive Director, and I also had that slight lack of understanding of the role the board plays. And being in this role now for 13 months, I've seen the importance and the incredible opportunity what communal democracy actually can do, and ensuring that you have that voice, ensuring that you make your own future. If we're going to be staying in Cape Town or staying in Western Cape for the foreseeable future, surely you want to live in a city, in a community that works for you, that benefits you and your family. And I think that opportunity, you don't necessarily have to stand on a board to make a difference, but you need to take an interest in your community. You need to vote for the right people that you want to represent you. You want to ask the burning questions. And we're never going to have the answers to everything. I think that's one thing we can probably all agree on this session. We won't agree on everything. We won't have the answers, but get involved. Your votes do matter. And September the 18th, that's what I'm going to say, is for our elections and conference. That's my little punt there, Tyla. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Darren?
Great plug, Daniel. That was very well, look, this might be a sort of an Australian way of looking at it, but really it's a fair go. And I think that ultimately everybody needs to have a fair chance at having their voice heard and their challenges addressed, whilst acknowledging that the future is our young leaders today, and that they must be nurtured. So I think those are the 3 critical aspects for what it means to me.
Thank you. So that is all the time we have. Thank you again to our panelists for being here today. It is clear that each of these Jewish boards play an important role in their communities, protecting their civil and political rights and Jewish way of life. It is so important the board represents the community at large, which requires each person in our community to speak up and make their voice heard. You have until the 26th of June to nominate yourself or a community member to stand for the Cape Board's election. 5 new members of the board will be elected by public ballots. A further 10 members will be elected by delegates of affiliated organizations at our annual general meeting. This will present us with a new board made up of 15 members to serve for 2 years. We urge you to get involved with your communal democracy and make sure your voice is represented around the board table. You can find out more at www.capesajbd.org/elections 2022. Once again, I would like to say a massive thank you to Darren Bloch, Amanda Bowman, and Daniel Bloch for speaking with us today, and to everyone who took the time to join us on Facebook. I trust that you enjoyed this lunchtime chat. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Tyla.